The girl, Chiyoko, woke up and found herself sealed inside a coffin. At her feet were 2 oxygen tanks. Above her, a camera was mounted, broadcasting her every move to the entire world. The number of viewers in the live stream skyrocketed, but not a single person called the police, because they were all longtime viewers. Before Chiyoko, 7 other people had appeared in this stream, and without exception, they all died after running out of oxygen. Even the decomposition of their bodies was fully recorded. Until the battery of the coffin's camera finally ran out. Only then would the live stream end. The police had attempted to catch the killer, but experts claimed that the criminal, known as Gravedigger, was using multiple overseas servers to stream the broadcasts, which made tracking the origin nearly impossible. Chiyoko had clearly heard of Gravedigger's infamy, yet she still tried to comfort herself. Fortunately, the police weren't completely helpless. They had developed a new kind of machine, one that could detect the murderous intent left behind at a crime scene, and use it to reconstruct the subconscious world of the killer. This was known as the ID well. Then they would send an investigator, Akihito, into it to search for clues. This way, they could uncover leads in the real world. But the machine had one major flaw. Anyone entering the ID well would lose all of their memories. So, the higher-ups at the police department placed the corpse of a young girl inside the ID well. As long as Akihito saw that corpse, he would recall his reason for being there, and solving the cause of the girl's death would help Akihito uncover the identity of the killer. This time, the cause of death was especially strange. The girl's entire body had been severely burned, yet there were no signs of a fire anywhere nearby. On the contrary, flames were raging outside the building. Floors were collapsing one after another. Akihito quickly found a girl trapped in a room on the top floor. After comparing her with external data, they confirmed she was the same person as the Chiyoko in the live stream. Akihito rushed in to rescue her, but the moment he opened the door, he was engulfed by an explosion shockwave. Even though this was an actual death, every time Akihito re-entered the ID well, he would lose all his previous memories. It was as if he were playing a game with no save points. After countless deaths, Akihito's mind was on the verge of collapse, but he didn't give up. Finally, after dying 100 times, he relied on muscle memory to reach Chiyoko's room. And sure enough, he found a clue to the criminal there. Across from the room they were in stood a man, holding a lit torch in his hand. External staff quickly identified the man. His name was Taichi, and he was Chiyoko's neighbor. Years ago, his family had perished in a fire, and he was the sole survivor. Police immediately mobilized. They went to Taichi's house in the real world, and found him watching the live stream. There was a foul stench coming from his basement. The police rushed downstairs. They opened a trunk, and found a corpse inside. It turns out that Chiyoko had already died a long time ago, and the Chiyoko in the live stream was just a recording. Even as he was arrested, Taichi laughed hysterically. He insisted he had done nothing wrong. It turned out, he had set that fire years ago himself. He wanted to kill his wife so he could be with someone else. Back then, Chiyoko had been standing by the window, afraid she'd testify against him in court. He decided to kill her as well. It seemed like the case was closed, but clearly, Taichi wasn't the real gravedigger, because in the ID well, the girl's corpse had already hinted that she had died in a different fire elsewhere, and had been moved to the current location afterward. This showed that Taichi was merely a copycat. He was imitating Gravedigger's killing method to frame him. Officer Koharu was frustrated that they still hadn't caught Gravedigger. Just then, she spotted a suspicious person in the crowd. The man had pulled his hat low over his face. Looking extremely suspicious, Koharu immediately gave chase. But what she didn't expect was that the man would suddenly appear right in front of her, then grab her and kiss her. It turned out, the man was mentally unstable. A drill had once been driven into his skull, damaging his brain and leaving him unable to distinguish between murderous intent and romantic feelings. Originally, he meant to kill Koharu, but in a moment of confused impulse, he kissed her instead. Koharu was caught completely off guard by the sudden move, and the man used the opportunity to escape. Sure, Koharu was already 23 years old. Getting kissed wasn't exactly a big deal, but what truly shocked her was the man's identity. He bore a striking resemblance to the serial killer who had recently emerged, the one known as Gravedigger, who had already kidnapped 7 victims, each time sealing them in a box, burying them underground, and streaming it live. The more Koharu thought about it, the more wrong it all felt, so she rushed back to the scene from earlier. Sure enough, the machine detected an intense murderous intent left behind by that man. Koharu immediately transmitted the data back to HQ. Once the data was received, HQ quickly constructed the man's subconscious world. Inside, there was a small island plummeting through the sky, and on it stood a house. After comparing with external records, officers confirmed that this house existed in the real world as well. The owner of that house was the man who had kissed Koharu Haruka. Inside the house, they found a photo that had been torn to pieces. It showed Haruka with his classmates from middle school. At the center of the photo was a girl, clearly the focal point. Koharu suspected the girl was likely Haruka's girlfriend, so she brought the photo to the girl's home. But to her surprise, the girl was already married. Koharu tried to ask if she knew Haruka's current whereabouts, but the woman didn't answer. Instead, she immediately grabbed a pack of tissues and dabbed at the wound on Koharu's forehead. But that seemingly thoughtful gesture sparked a flicker of doubt in Koharu's mind. As their conversation went on, Koharu learned that the woman's name was Inami, and she had gone to middle school with Haruka, but she claimed they were just ordinary classmates. Still, Koharu clearly didn't believe her, because when asked whether Haruka had any other female friends, Inami answered without hesitation, none, and throughout the conversation, Inami never once stopped staring at the wound on Koharu's forehead. Koharu slowly stood up, then suddenly pulled out her gun and aimed it at Inami. Because from the moment she stepped into the house, she had noticed one of the knives from the kitchen knife rack was missing, and at that very moment, Haruka was hiding in the corner. He immediately hurled the knife toward Koharu, but Matsuoka blocked it just in time. Seeing this, Haruka had no choice but to disappear again. Koharu quickly called HQ to request backup, then fired a few blank shots at Inami. She was trying to lure Haruka out of hiding, and that would be the perfect moment to strike. Inami was stunned by what she had just witnessed. She never imagined this female officer could be so fearless and so cold. Even Koharu's superior, Matsuoka, was shocked. He realized that after going through so many cases, Koharu had lost some of the emotions that normal people should have. So he made a recommendation to the police chief that Koharu be assigned as a full-time investigator inside the ID Well world, and tasked with uncovering the mole within the department. This mole operated under the alias John Walker. He had appeared in the subconscious worlds of numerous serial killers, and initial suspicions suggested that John Walker was the mastermind who had pushed these people to become serial killers. This man is extremely psychologically disturbed. He called himself Challenger. His favorite thing to do was beat people to death, using it as a way to show off his strength, but most of his victims were underage girls. 2 years ago, when Akihito came home from work, what greeted him was a house drenched in his daughter's blood. Before he could even process the horror, his wife had already broken down mentally and took her own life in the bathtub by slitting her wrists. Akihito was instantly consumed by despair, and what made it worse was that Akihito was a police officer, devastated beyond words. He chose to take justice into his own hands. Though he had avenged his family, Akihito was arrested and thrown behind bars, branded a murderer by his fellow officers. But not long after his imprisonment, the police developed a new piece of technology, a device that could capture the lingering murderous intent left at a crime scene, and reconstruct the killer's subconscious. The ID Well. Clues uncovered within an ID Well could directly aid in solving the case, but to enter a killer's ID Well, one had to have killed someone too. So naturally, Akihito, a former cop turned killer, became the perfect candidate. Over the next 2 years, he helped authorities apprehend countless serial murderers, but he began to notice something strange. It was as if all these serial killers had been trained. Their behavior was unnervingly synchronized. Each one took turns killing from Monday through Saturday, as if following some twisted schedule. Meanwhile, Koharu made a major discovery within an ID Well. She came across a strange device, the very same one used in the real world to dive into an ID Well. When she looked closer, she realized the machine was still running, which meant this ID Well contained a deeper level of ID Well hidden inside. Driven by curiosity, Koharu entered the machine, but she forgot one critical difference between this world and reality. There were no teammates around to press the return button, which meant she would be trapped inside the ID Well forever. To rescue Koharu, HQ dispatched Akihito and another named Momoki to go in after her. Akihito was to dive into the ID Well to find Koharu, while Momoki would wait 10 minutes, then activate the return sequence to bring them both back. When Akihito opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was a painfully familiar ceiling. He stood up in disbelief, only to see his wife, the same wife who had died years ago. Then he noticed his daughter, peacefully asleep in bed. He understood in an instant, this was the ID well, and 10 minutes from now, he would be forcibly pulled back to reality. Akihito knew time was short. He rushed back into the bedroom and held the two people he loved more than anything in the world. But the 10 minutes had already passed. He was not forcibly expelled from here. That's when he realized this was a second layer within the ID well, and in this place, time moved much slower. That's when he got a bold idea. In this world, the challenge of the man who murdered his wife and daughter hadn't been caught yet, and one of Akihito's deepest regrets in life was that he let Challenger die too easily. So he picked up a handgun and, relying solely on memory, went straight to Challenger's house. The moment they came face to face, a brutal hand-to-hand fight broke out, but Akihito wasn't a match for him. It didn't take long before Challenger broke Akihito's arm, but that was exactly what Akihito wanted, because once Challenger assaulted an officer, Akihito had legal grounds for self-defense. A few gunshots rang out, and finally, Challenger collapsed from blood loss. Akihito planned to leave, but when it came time to say goodbye to his wife and daughter, he hesitated. Time moved slowly here, after all, so he made a choice to stay just a little longer. And so, Akihito lingered in this world for who knows how long. He even began to lose track of what was real and what was fake, until one day, while out buying a birthday cake for his daughter, a familiar voice snapped him out of it. It was Koharu, the very person he'd come to rescue. That's when it hit him. He had been in this world for 2 years, and the moment he recognized this world as an illusion, the entire ID well began to collapse. Memories he had buried, his daughter's scream, his wife's lifeless body, all came flooding back. He panicked, desperately. He made one last call home. His wife picked up, her voice warm and concerned. Akihito froze. He knew it wasn't real. His throat tightened, his voice trembling, but finally, he steadied himself and said his last goodbye. Meanwhile, up in the previous layer of the ID well, Momoki finished the 10-minute countdown and hit the button. Akihito was coming back, but Koharu, she chose to stay behind, because while she was down here, she had uncovered something critical, a lead pointing directly to the mastermind. This world still had time before it fully collapsed, and she planned to use every second of it to expose the true killer. The one behind everything was none other than their police chief, Takahiko, and his codename was indeed John Walker. For years, the girl named Kiki hadn't had a single peaceful night of sleep, because every time she closed her eyes, she was brutally murdered in her dreams. Kiki had a rare, terrifying ability. Anyone within 5 meters of her would be involuntarily dragged into her dream world, and that meant every twisted soul around her could do whatever they pleased to her in her sleep. Police Chief Takahiko discovered her ability. Under the pretense of treatment, he started entering Kiki's dream world himself. Worse still, he recruited 6 murderers, assigning each one a weekday Monday through Saturday, to repeatedly invade her dreams and kill her again and again. This wasn't torture for torture's sake. It was training. The more times Kiki died in her dreams, the stronger her power became, its range expanding rapidly. But Takahiko wasn't done. He needed one last killer to complete his 7. That's when he set his sights on Fukuda, a genius with an IQ of 150, plagued by a crippling obsession with numbers. Anytime Fukuda saw a number, he couldn't help but memorize it. The flood of numbers nearly drove him mad, until he drilled a hole into his own skull, just to relieve the pressure. But that same obsession made him remember exactly when Takahiko had approached him. Koharu pulled the police sign-in records, and there it was. Every officer was accounted for at the time, except the chief, who just so happened to be abroad on a business trip. The truth hit like lightning. Koharu raced back to reality, and when the team learned the mastermind behind the training of serial killers was none other than their revered chief Takahiko, they were stunned speechless. The commander immediately ordered his arrest. But just then, the entire station went dark. Takahiko had seen this coming. He activated a secret plan he had prepared for years. In the basement of the precinct, he opened a sealed chamber where Kiki had been held prisoner all along. After years of psychological torment, her powers now blanketed the entire building. She could even forcibly put people to sleep, dragging them into her nightmarish dream world. Kiki's dreamscape had now become a true nightmare. Anyone who died within it faced the very real risk of becoming a vegetative husk in the real world. Panic exploded through the police station, and in the chaos, Takuhiko slipped silently into the room. But then shockingly, he turned the gun on himself, and at last, he revealed everything. He wanted to expand Kiki's power across the entire world, to pull the minds of every criminal into the depths of the ID well. Then he would kill himself, merging his own ID well permanently with the dream world. By doing so, he would become an eternal enforcer, a godlike entity, able to infiltrate anyone's mind at will, to see every secret, to hunt every sin. With that power, he claimed, he could eliminate crime forever. Koharu burned with fury. She wanted to end him herself, but it was too late. Takuhiko's body had already died. His consciousness was now fused with Kiki's mind. Inside that surreal, digital world, he could die over and always come back. Takuhiko, confident in his victory, casually sat down on something that resembled a chair, but at that moment, Akihito suddenly burst into laughter, because what Takuhiko was sitting on wasn't a chair, it was the activation device for the ID well. Without hesitation, Koharu pressed the remote control, sending Takuhiko deep into an ID well within an ID well. When Takuhiko opened his eyes again, he found himself back in the moment right before his suicide. Meanwhile, outside the building, Momoki was doing everything he could to stop Kiki from unleashing her power. By now, Kiki's abilities had engulfed the entire building. To even get close, Momoki had to wear a heavy protective suit. But even then, his consciousness was severely affected. He was on the verge of passing out multiple times. By the time Momoki finally reached Kiki, 4 of his ribs had already been broken. He had every chance to end it all with a single shot. That would have brought everything to a close, but he just couldn't bring himself to do it. After all, Kiki had never done anything wrong. Still, if he let things continue, countless more people would fall into an endless sleep. The only option left was to place her back into the containment pod. Maybe, someday in the future, there would be a way to save Kiki from this endless cycle of death and rebirth. Moved by Momoki's words, Kiki quietly returned to the pod. Not long after, everyone at the police station began to wake up one by one. Akihito and Koharu also safely returned to the real world from the ID well. With that, the story of this season came to an end, but as long as crime exists, this story will continue.